A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
The first time it happened, I dismissed it as fatigue, an odd glitch in my routine, maybe. It was a Tuesday night, the kind when the world outside my window seemed to retain an unsettling stillness, like a predator waiting to pounce on its prey. As I huddled on my couch, scrolling through my social media feeds, I noticed something strange, the perfectly timed ads that seemed to know my thoughts, the offhand comments from friends and strangers alike that echoed my innermost fears. I shrugged it off and turned off my phone, only to feel the familiar buzz of an incoming notification. The ground shook, not in earthquakes, but in an unnerving resonance within my ribs, vibrating right to where I was seated. I peeked out the window, but the streets looked the same, silent and cozy beneath the streetlights. Days turned into weeks, and the peculiarities piled up like snowdrifts on my doorstep, bright red cars passing by only to vanish as if erased from existence, the sound of laughter from children that never seemed to have a source, bleary faces of passers-by that all wore expressions of shared secret knowledge that I wasn't privy to. I began to feel like I was an extra in a film I didn't understand, every pedestrian an actor rehearsing a script long before I arrived on the set. One night, as the paranoia unfurled its icy tendrils around my sanity, I overheard two men talking on the street as I stepped out for some fresh air. They looked generic, all nondescript jackets and ball caps, but what chilled my blood was their conversation. It sounded like they were discussing me. "Did you see how he looked at the camera?" one said. "He's questioning the code. We can't let him find out." My heart raced as goosebumps erupted on my skin. I wanted to shout at them, to run, to hide. Instead, I slipped back into my house, locking the door with trembling hands, the edges of my vision swimming in panic. It wasn't long before reality started to chip away at its borders. I would be at a coffee shop, and the same barista would serve me every day at the same hour, yet each day, she'd say something slightly different. "Here you go. Your usual." One day, "And are you trying something new today?" The next, despite my order never changing. I wondered if they were all watching me, all playing me like a game character, feeding on my confusion. I sought solace in the digital world, perhaps desperately thinking that if this was some program or simulation, I could hack some control back. I downloaded every conspiracy theory forum I could find, drowning my mind in the chilling possibilities. A string of late-night rabbit holes led me to discussions of the reality scientists spoke about, of simulations that could be constructed to keep human subjects unaware of their confinement. Every post concluded with ominous suggestions: keep your camera off, trust no one, never share your location. I became a phantom in my own life, venturing further into isolated corners of the web where like-minded souls converged. Then one night, the screen dimmed, turning to a solid black as if someone had clicked end on the world I knew. I was alone, unmoored. I looked at the mirror and barely recognized myself. The face that stared back wore a distant, hollow expression that burned with shocking awareness. "What if I'm not real?" the figure whispered. That thought wrapped around my neck like a noose, squeezing tighter until the next day, something snapped. I ventured outside again, drawn by the need for truth, my footsteps echoing on the pavement which seemed too sterile, too calculated. I walked through the park, watching the same people repeat patterns that felt rehearsed, and beneath the noise of laughter and chatting lies a dissonant hum like a malfunctioning machine. I saw one woman who flipped her hair, a simple gesture, but it felt like a coded signal. My heart raced in recognition of a trigger that shifted something inside fucking me up, breaking my focus on the facade. I ran to her, gripped by a primal urge to know, to prove to myself that I was still real as I yelled out her name, though I didn't know it. She turned, the joyful spark in her eyes vanished as if someone had erased her. Her lips moved, forming something that was clearly not any language I could decipher, and yet I understood its meaning in my bone marrow. "This is not real." She sunk into the ground, leaving a ripple in reality, and my world splintered. I stumbled backward, feeling the ground dissolve beneath my feet, dragging me into the infinite space between what was and what might not exist at all. I awoke in my bed, drenched in sweat, heart racing, the darkness swallowing up echoes of that encounter, my sanity teetering against this dizzy, digital void. Days after, the details blurred but the sentiments sharpened. What is reality if not a fluid construct shaped by perception? At work, my co-workers moved from room to room, and the world outside my gaze felt warped, the colors unnaturally vivid, the shadows reaching at strange angles, stretching out like claws attempting to grasp my very existence. I couldn't tell if I saw reflection or projection. The border between my mind and the universe felt indistinguishable, a line washed away with each passing moment. So, I began a new endeavor, I printed signs, calling out to anyone who felt the imbalance, who experienced the flickering of walls, the glitching of time, who had seen the unseen nodes of reality glitch in front of them. I walked from cafe to cafe and stapled these sheets onto bulletin boards, hoping to reach someone, anyone. Waking up, they proclaimed in bold letters alongside cryptic drawings of twisted faces, redacted timelines, inviting whispers for those lost in the phantoms of everyday life to come together. But the response was hollow. Empty walls reflected my desperation, and reality stretched thin around me like icing on a cake, constantly spun and cracking. I finally returned home, staring at the light streaming through my window, feeling cold fingertips tracing the small of my back, but this time, I knew it wasn't just paranoia. I closed my eyes, willing myself to slip free of this incessant loop. I didn't know what I was searching for, but the urge to escape grew like an echo in a dream I couldn't shake off. It was then I choked, gasping for breath, and in the stillness of that suffocating shell, I felt it return, a distortion in the air, a rip in the fabric of something I wasn't sure was real. As I opened my eyes, a message flickered on my phone screen: "You are one of us now." It was a message from a stranger, and beneath it, a deep, lurking fear coiled tighter, waiting for me to untangle the truth or be consumed whole by this living nightmare that felt more real than anything ever had. I swallowed hard, realizing that I was diving deeper into a reality that seemed determined to swallow me whole. I had become part of the experiment, and there was no escaping it. The game had just begun, and I was the unwitting player in the most twisted augmented reality one could imagine, forever questioning if I was the one holding the controller or if, in the end, I was just another flickering shadow waiting for deletion. I always thought of myself as a meticulous person, perhaps a little too obsessed with presenting a flawless image to the world around me, and when I spotted the job listing for my dream company, with its sleek offices and promises of innovation, I couldn't resist the urge to embellish my resume just a little. Of course, it started innocently. I highlighted skills I had dabbled in, exaggerated figures from past jobs, and added a few awards I'd only dreamed of winning. Nothing that I felt merited a guilty conscience until the day came when I received the call that would change my life forever. "We'd like to offer you the position," the voice on the other end chirped, brimming with enthusiasm. A wave of euphoria washed over me. I could hardly believe my luck. My heart raced as I envisioned the trajectory of my career blossoming in ways I had only fantasized about. I quickly accepted the offer without a second thought, the thrill pushing any remaining trepidation about the deceit far from my mind. But as my start date approached, that exhilaration morphed into a persistent gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach. On my first day, fresh and smiling while entirely unprepared for the wave of responsibility that hit me, my colleagues welcomed me with warmth, eager to show me around the sleek, high-tech workspace. Yet with every passing interaction, I felt the absurd weight of my lies pressing down on me, each laugh shared over coffee, and every confident nod in meetings chipping away at the fragile facade I had erected. Every task handed to me was a reminder of my inadequacies. I was scrambling to keep up with projects I had never been involved in before, ideas I'd faked familiarity with now swirling around me like ominous clouds. I could feel their gaze on me, an unspoken scrutiny as if they were assessing my every word and gesture for signs of deception. I brushed it off as paranoia until that fateful Tuesday when I walked into a meeting and was met with a shocked silence upon announcing my name. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room before a colleague I'd never met before leaned forward, eyes narrowing in recognition, causing my blood to run cold. "I didn't know they hired you," he said slowly, tension rising as he pulled up a screen and my stomach dropped at the sight of a dissected version of my resume in front of the whole team. It had been doctored, every impossible accomplishment laid bare, and I felt the walls of reality start to close in. In a brutal twist, he began listing my so-called achievements aloud, each lie unraveling round me as laughter morphed into whispers, pointing fingers and surprised glances, their innocence shattered as they realized the extent of my deception. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears as I scrambled for a retort but found none that wouldn't further expose my incompetency. That's when I saw the reflection of something darting behind my colleagues, the flicker of movement so jarring that my instincts screamed for me to turn around. But when I did, the room was empty, a vast silence settled, an ethereal chill crawling up my spine. Only my colleagues remained, their focus now shifting to me, their glares less forgiving and more predatory. I mumbled something inadequate about needing to check my notes, my palms slick with sweat, and when I finally gathered the courage to excuse myself and escape the cold confines of that room, I felt highs boring into my back, judging, mocking. I rushed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, wondering how I could disappear, how I could undo everything right where I stood, but it was too late. The doubt gnawed at me, relentless and unforgiving. In the days that followed, it felt like I was being shadowed. Colleagues whispered as I walked by, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disgust. It was on the fifth day when I received an anonymous email that made my heart plummet. The title read, "You're in over your head," and inside, it detailed my lies piece by piece. I realized someone had been tracking me, watching my every move, ready to expose me completely, and the looming threat made me dizzy with anxiety. I had no idea who had sent it, but every response felt like a tiny noose tightening around my neck. The office's friendly smiles twisted into sinister grins. I imagined shadows following me from room to room, their whispers rising like smoke, suffocating me in a chilling silence. I wanted to scream out, to confess, to warn others of the twisted edge I teetered upon, but I was trapped in a web of my own making. One night, spiraling into despair, I decided to leave early, heart pounding as I slipped through the doors unnoticed, falling into the cold night air, desperate for some clarity. But over and over, day by day, my lies haunted me, twisting my thoughts like a sick roller coaster that gripped tighter with every turn. On my way home, I thought I saw someone following me, watching through the glass reflection of store windows, their face obscured, wrapped in shadow. I quickened my pace, each hurried footfall thumping against the pavement as my embarrassment morphed into palpable dread. When I reached my apartment, the door creaked open, and I let out a sigh, sinking against the wall, hoping it was all a figment of my imagination. But as I sunk into the comforting embrace of my couch, sleep refused to come, and the shadows of regret wrapped around me tightly. That night, I awoke to the buzz of my phone, an urgent notification flickering in the darkness. I hesitated, but something compelled me to look. It was an anonymous text reading, "We're coming for you," and I felt the world tilt, terror gnawing at my calm. I finally decided to confront my fate the next morning at the office, every nerve in my body screaming to go in prepared, to tell them the truth and accept whatever punishment awaited me. But as I walked through the doors, the atmosphere felt different. A thick tension, palpable and suffocating, settled in the air. There was an eeriness to my coworkers' faces, something beyond mere judgment, and I swallowed hard, hoping they wouldn't smell the anxiety rolling off of me. That's when I noticed the same colleague from the meeting, his expression oddly triumphant, as though he'd been waiting for me. Before I could gather my thoughts, he approached me with a disarming smile. "You think we didn't know? You think this was about your resume?" He laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills coursing through my veins. "The truth doesn't matter. We've been watching you, plastering yourself in a mask of lies for all the world to see. You're not the first, you know, and you certainly won't be the last." I stood frozen as he leaned in, his face inches from mine, a sinister glint in his eyes. "But you're special. We've got something for you." Panic bubbled under my skin. I was backed into a corner by people who knew things far more profound than I could imagine. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room darkened momentarily, unveiling shrouded figures lurking in the shadows behind my colleagues, fading into obscurity before my mind could fully grasp the horror. They approached slowly, their movements predatory, embodying everything buried under the weight of my regrets, everything I thought I could escape. "You'll find out soon enough," he whispered before stepping back into the encroaching darkness, and suddenly, it became crystal clear, this wasn't merely about my resume, it was about the very essence of lies, and how deeply they can penetrate the fabric of your life. As dread wove through me, I understood I was ensnared in a game far beyond my comprehension, and as a crooked grin spread across the room, I realized too late that there was no escaping the consequences of my deception. They knew. They always knew. It was an overcast Saturday afternoon in late October when I realized I had never really known my grandparents at all. They'd lived in the same ancient house for as long as I could remember, a place filled with the dust and whispers of past generations, sepia-toned photographs lining the walls like silent guardians of forgotten memories. I had always been both fascinated and terrified by their attic, where shadowy corners brimmed with old trunks and strange, ornate trinkets I dared not touch, but curiosity finally overshadowed the warnings I'd heard from my parents. "Never go into their room without knocking," they'd said with wide eyes. As I stood before their door, the deep, creaking wood seemed to beckon me to seek something hidden away. I nudged the door open just a crack and was surprised to find it ajar. My heart raced in tandem with my relentless impulse to explore. I stepped inside and the silence engulfed me, a strange, thick kind of stillness that felt alive and watchful. Dust motes floated in the muted light that pushed through the curtains, and the faint smell of lavender hung in the air but mingled with something else. Something dank and rotten that I couldn't quite place. The room was filled with furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts from a time I had never lived, and yet one corner loomed ominous and darker than the rest, their bed, bigger than I expected, dominating the space, and it wasn't the meticulously made quilt or the familiar family photographs that locked my gaze. It was the nightstand, an ancient, warped thing that reeked of secrets, and on it sat a small, intricately carved wooden box that seemed to pulse with an ethereal energy that demanded my attention. My fingers tingled as I reached for it, the thrill of discovery igniting something primal inside me, a feeling that drowned out the nagging voice reminding me this was a boundary I had crossed. The moment I lifted the box, a chill swept through the room, and I felt a heat rising from the floor as though it were alive beneath me. As I pried it open, the sound of aged wood creaking echoed ominously, and a shiver cascaded over my spine when I discovered an assortment of narrow, flickering candles, their wax warped and melting down like the remnants of a long-gone ritual, along with a faded photograph of my grandmother, younger and radiant, her smile both inviting and predatory, and beneath it, a small, tattered, and yellowed parchment bearing regretful, inked words, "Never awaken them." Before I could grapple with what that meant, the room darkened as the clouds outside thickened and a storm brewed, stirring shadows that danced around me, taking form and casting grotesque shapes that lingered just at the edge of my sight, and suddenly understanding washed over me. This was more than mere curiosity, there was a history here, something sinister woven into the fabric of my family's legacy, a dark thread of heretical secrets that not only involved my grandparents but had been whispered down through generations, a story woven into the very walls of this house that I had been shielded from. My innocent world cracked slowly as the door slammed shut behind me, the sudden noise vibrating through the air like a warning bell, and the once quiet room exploded into a cacophony of whispers, voices slithering around me, some familiar, some foreign, each filled with longing and despair, begging me to turn around, while something heavy settled on my chest, suffocating me, as if those very shadows yearned for a sacrifice, a penance for trespassing where their memories lingered like a stench. I stood frozen, rooted to the spot. My grandparents had always been quaint, gentle souls, but as I stared at the photograph again, I noticed behind my grandmother's bright eyes were hints of something darker, something buried but not forgotten. Then, a cold draft stole through the room, extinguishing the air from my lungs, and everything seemed to shift. The shadows gathered together, and in that darkness, forms began to sharpen, grotesque figures, twisted remnants of people I knew and those I didn't, all distorted but undeniable in their resemblance to me, their faces twisted in agony, mouths pulled in unnatural expressions, forming a twisted tapestry of faces that mocked my mistake, the very consequence of my choice. The silence shattered, and I heard my own scream mingling with the cacophony of voices, twisting my reality into something horrifying. The candles flickered back to life, their flames casting an ethereal glow onto the walls, illuminating the hidden details, nightmares I had never before perceived, where my grandparents' faces and those of their ancestors morphed into grotesque masks of despair, their eyes hollow, sockets brimming with shadows that danced like flames in the wind. The air became thick, laden with a palpable dread that clawed at my throat, a primal instinct screaming in my brain to flee, yet my legs felt like lead, tethered by an unseen force, the consequence of having breached a boundary I had never even known existed, a truth my family had hidden from me. Suddenly, I was enveloped in a cacophony of laughter, low and cruel, cascading around me in waves as the figures lunged toward me, their hands outstretched like warped tendrils seeking to ensnare my innocence. I stumbled backward, the box crashing to the floor, spilling its contents, the candles extinguishing, leaving me in an all-consuming darkness as the last of my innocence flickered and snuffed out. With one final push, I managed to reach for the door, pulling it with all my might, and just as it creaked open, I was thrust into the hallway where the reality of my home loomed large, the normality seeping back into my bones, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I had escaped, but in the depths of my heart, I felt an echo filled with terror and darkness, a lingering shadow that whispered the secrets of my family, secrets that had been hidden so cleverly. Now, clawing at my conscience, never to be forgotten, and as I ran down the hall, I swore I could hear my grandmother's voice faintly calling my name, lovingly, reassuringly, yet tinged with a grotesque echo of longing and regret that promised I would never truly be free of what I had witnessed. I had stolen a glimpse into a world where innocence had no place, leaving me haunted by the question, had I inadvertently set something in motion, something that would shift like the shadows in the corners of my mind, waiting for the perfect moment to collect the price for my insatiable curiosity? I'm having a baby tomorrow and I'm not ready for what's ahead. It's a strange thing to find yourself unprepared for a moment so monumental, especially when you've spent 9 months planning, reading every parenting book, and brainstorming names that would sound cute together, but all that changed when the hallucinations started. I thought they were just my anxiety playing tricks. I mean, Who wouldn't be paranoid about becoming a parent? But then, one night as I sat in the nursery, polishing the unused crib and imagining a life of sleepless nights filled with laughter and diaper changes, I saw her, a little girl with dark curly hair sitting in the corner, her wide eyes locking onto mine with unsettling assurance. I blinked, and she was gone. Just like that, leaving a cold trail of dread in her wake. Each day leading up to my due date became a twisted game of reality versus delusion, with shadows stretching across walls whispering secrets I could never quite catch. I called my husband, Jake, into the room one evening, trying to explain, but the moment he walked in, the little girl vanished, and my words faltered as an empty silence settled between us. He brushed it off as stress, suggested a prenatal class, maybe some meditation, but how do you meditate when you can't shake the feeling that something is waiting for you, hanging just out of sight beyond the edges of perception? The following morning, my mother called, and as I lifted the phone to my ear, the little girl appeared again, this time closer, her hair spilling like dark silk over her tiny shoulders. I gasped, and when my mother asked if I was okay, I told her I didn't know, that I couldn't stop seeing things that weren't there, but she insisted I was just overwhelmed, that my mind was preparing for the shift to come. Yet that evening, as I packed my hospital bag and settled into my last moments of silence, the little girl laid her head on my lap, and I felt a strange warmth that sent goosebumps racing up my arms. "What are you?" I whispered, feeling a mix of fear and tenderness swell inside me. She looked up, her tiny face twisted in expression I couldn't quite grasp before she whispered back, "Soon, you'll see." That phrase echoed in my mind as if it were changeling magic, weaving spells of foreboding. By the time I lay in bed that night, every creak of the house sounded like the voice of impending doom, and before sleep could wrap its weary fingers around me, I swear I heard a liquid hiss, something wet and slithering, skittering in the darkness. I dared not open my eyes. I wanted to, desperately, but I couldn't bring myself to confront what lurked at the edges of that pitch-black silence. Instead, dread squeezed my chest, a vice tightening tighter with each breath I took. Morning came too quickly with the sharp ring of my alarm, and I found myself staring at the ceiling in a dazed state, trying to shake off the remnants of night terrors that tangled in my thoughts like cobwebs. My body was restless, anxious, and the little girl was nowhere to be seen. Jake poked his head into the room, his face weary but hopeful, and I pulled on the smile I had practiced for months, but the dread lurked behind my eyes. We arrived at the hospital, and as they wheeled me into the delivery room, I felt a fleeting moment of clarity, as if I could finally shake the shadow from my mind. It was at that moment that the lights flickered, and the room grew uncomfortably cold. Jake's expression morphed from concern to confusion, but I knew, without a doubt, that she was there. "I can see her," I shouted, and all eyes turned to me, disbelief written on their faces as I pointed toward the corner, where the little girl stood, seemingly grinning. But as they looked, she vanished, and my words were met with nervous chuckles and murmurs of false reassurance. I felt frantic, urging them to look, to see how real she was, but the doctors continued their work, oblivious, pulling the baby from me while I fought back disbelief. And then, silence, the kind of silence that pierces through your very being, followed by a monstrous wail splitting the air. But the joy didn't bloom, it twisted into an unseen horror, as if something rotten lay beneath that innocent sound. "It's a girl," the doctor announced with unbridled glee, but the moment I glanced at my newborn, the familiar weight of something missing flooded my heart. The little girl stood beside me, fingers curling in excitement, and as I reached for my daughter, she pulled away. I was forced to watch her crawl toward the exit, dragging my heart along in her wake, and the truth crashed over me like a wave. The little girl wasn't my child but the harbinger of something darker, something that lurked in the recesses of my mind, ripping the innocence away from motherhood. I screamed, my voice a desperate echo as I lunged forward, but she only smiled back at me, a knowing smile, as my real baby wailed louder, lashes fluttering like gossamer. I stumbled back, my legs failing as a horrifying revelation spiraled into view, and as I turned to find help, the room emptied before my eyes, the doctors and nurses vanishing just like the little girl had, leaving only my baby and me in an eerie web of shadow. "Where is everyone?" I hissed, panic tightening my throat, but the little girl spun in circles, giggling, those same haunting eyes locking onto mine, reflecting back the chilling awareness that I was all alone, cradling the fragile weight of the life I'd brought into the world, now forever lost between two realities, one of love, innocence, and warmth, and the other an endless, consuming dark that promised to twist everything I knew. The walls breathed darkness around me, and with each heartbeat, I felt the little girl's laughter lurk closer in the shadows, as if awaiting the moment when she would finally claim what was hers. I never believed in the normal concept of good and evil. To me, they were just perceptions shaped by our experiences, until I stumbled onto a dark truth about myself that I should have ignored. It all began one mundane evening when I was scrolling through an online forum, where a group of people discussed how they had received prime access to something akin to an ethereal black market. They spoke of a subscription service where dreams could be bought and sold like commodities. I dismissed it as mere fantasy until, out of sheer curiosity and boredom, I joined. I felt an irresistible pull towards a listing titled The Life You Deserve, and the seller promised an existence where I could embody my deepest desires, no strings attached, just a simple transaction of your memories, beliefs, and reality. The moment I clicked accept and input my bank info, I felt the proverbial spark igniting inside me, a surge of something between excitement and trepidation. I was stepping into a pact I believed I could control. The night arrived when the deal was to be sealed, and as I fell into a restless sleep, I vaguely remembered hearing the seller's voice whisper through the void, "Welcome to the experience of your life." What followed was an otherworldly journey. I woke up the next day feeling better than I ever had, equipped with charm and charisma, and radiating a confidence I never thought possible. People flocked to me as if I were a magnet, promotions piled up, friends multiplied, and I seemed to be living a charmed existence. But lurking beneath the surface, the initial euphoria transformed into an insatiable hunger. I discovered that with each fleeting moment basked in success, I became addicted to this newfound power over my own narrative. As I savored the highs, I started to notice the threads of my old life unraveling, the messages from friends I barely had time for, the frantic calls from my family who snapped at my absence, and the mounting silence that filled the spaces where laughter used to echo. Ignoring the signals, I pressed on, diving deeper into this allure that had become all-consuming until one fateful evening when the facade began to crack. Alone in my apartment, I swiped through my phone, observing a world where everyone I once cared about had grown distant, their lives had moved on without me, while I remained perpetually glued to this narcissistic splendor. Then came the day of reckoning when I returned home late, exhausted from exerting every ounce of my new charisma. As I flipped on the light switch, I was hit with a sense of dread. My apartment, once filled with warmth, felt cold and uninviting, an empty shell. But that wasn't all, there was something else. My belongings had subtly changed, altered slightly to reflect aspects of me that didn't sit right. The dining table, once cluttered with old magazines and memories, was entirely bare, save for a picture frame holding a photo of me that looked almost alien, devoid of emotion, with hollow eyes that seemed to gaze right into my soul. Panic gripped me, and I quickly scoured the internet for the seller, feeling that I had been tricked, and desperately typed in "The Life You Deserve" only to find the page wiped clean, a digital ghost that left no trace behind. In that moment, a sense of clarity washed over me. I had achieved everything I had yearned for, but at what cost? I was haunted by the husks of connections I had discarded willingly in pursuit of hollow victories. I had become a specter, a mere shadow of my former self completely eclipsed by ambition. As days turned into weeks, I fought the growing void inside, engaging in desperate attempts to reconnect with my memories, but the harder I tried, the clearer it became that there was no going back. I could feel the pieces of my existence drifting further away from me like leaves caught on a merciless breeze. The profound loneliness morphed into panic. I couldn't function without the constant external validation. I found myself pacing the apartment, muttering to shadowed corners, desperate to recapture that warmth, when I noticed, quite suddenly, a figure standing beyond the sheer curtain of my window. I rushed to the glass, heart racing, but all I saw was the darkness of night, distorted silhouettes flickering in and out with the streetlights. I thought I'd lost my mind until I caught sight of a reflection looming behind me, a face I recognized but couldn't place, my own twisted image wearing my old self like a mask, deep lines carving despair around its eyes that shone with a sinister light. That's when I realized everything I had gained was merely temporary, a cheap substitute for the path I abandoned, leaving me stuck between but never wholly ensconced in either life. I felt the weight of regret like a blade buried deep within me. I had traded everything of value for glimmering illusions. It dawned on me that while I had grown from a shadowy introvert to a gilded socialite, I had forfeited the essence of what made me human, the messiness of relationships, the comfort of vulnerability, and the irreplaceable bonds of family and friends. Desperation clawed at my throat as I attempted to fabricate new memories that might heal the fractures, but the feel of genuine laughter, of shared moments, slipped further from my grasp. One night, under a moon obscured by clouds, the reality of everything imploded, and I sank to my knees in my bare living room as an audible crackling echoed, a sound not unlike the shattering of glass, and before I could comprehend what was happening, I was pulled into that dark expanse, a chasm of my own making. The whispers returned, haunting reminders that this was my reckoning. A shadowy vortex opened up before me, a sinister marketplace where voices melded into a chorus that echoed my name over and over, and amidst the frenzy surroundings, I saw it, the offering. My original life, nestled like a precious trinket amongst all things valuable I had redeemed, in exchange for my true self. It was a vision I had forgotten, filled with laughter, warmth, and vibrant connections that once painted my world in brilliant colors. But the catch was clear: reclaiming that life meant I would forfeit my newfound power, becoming an ordinary ghost of my former self, a choice I was loath to make. In that moment of indecision, I felt time bending, collapsing, everything I had achieved swirling around me in an inescapable storm of consequence, leading me face to face with my past. I knew I should have walked away. I should have resisted the allure of what I was never meant to possess, because ultimately, that world was ephemeral, leaving me hollow and lost. In a desperate bid to reclaim what I had left behind, I reached out, grasping for a thread woven into the tapestry of my existence, the warmth of my family, the laughter of friends, the little moments of failure that once shaped me. As my fingers brushed against the vision, everything came crashing down, and I awoke the next morning back in my old life, pocked with scars but remarkably intact. Yet, even as dawn broke, I couldn't shake the feeling. My world had fallen apart because of my insatiable hunger, revealing a truth darker than I ever imagined. I had chosen to run towards something I thought I wanted, unaware that sometimes, what you really seek is buried deep within the life you already possess. I made a girl quit school, and it still haunts me to this day. I can't shake the feeling that I'm to blame for everything that happened to her afterward, and the memories claw at my mind like a possessed creature. It all began during my sophomore year of high school when Emily transferred to our small town. She was shy, with soft features and dark eyes that seemed to absorb the world instead of reflect it, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was different. At first, I tried to befriend her. My own brand of high school insecurity made me reach out, but that was before the others got wind of her arrival. Misfit kids like me always seemed to congregate around each other, and Emily quickly fell into the crosshairs of the school's most vicious clique, the ones that reveled in tearing apart anyone different. They targeted her with whispers and snickers, and I could feel the tension thickening in the air as I stood by, torn between standing up for her or wanting to fit in myself. It's easy to rationalize cowardice when you're young and terrified, but as the weeks went by, their jabs escalated into actual harassment. They would trip her in the hall, shove her books to the ground and laugh, and in a moment of weakness, I joined in, laughing along, thinking it was just harmless fun until I saw the light die in her eyes. I watched as Emily became more withdrawn, the spark in her life snuffed out, her laughter became a rare sound, and the vibrant personality I initially saw shriveled into a ghostly reminder of what might have been. One afternoon, I overheard them daring her to show up to the next party, taunting her to come and see who'd laugh at her again, and without pausing to think, I went home and crafted an anonymous note. "Don't go to the party," it read, "no one wants you there." I slipped it into her locker, a sick mix of guilt and joy coursing through me, thinking I was protecting her when really, I was burying her. When the night of the party arrived, I heard the laughter echo down the street from my window, my insides twisting as I imagined her not showing up, only to feel relief as I thought at least she was safe, safe from ridicule, safe from me, from all of it. The following week, Emily was gone, and the rumor was that her parents pulled her out of school, that she wanted nothing to do with that hellhole any longer. I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but then a weight settled over my chest. I had traded a real person for my own self-preservation. I became a ghost in my own life, high school dragging on in a numbing blur of faces and grades, and the laughter of the others echoed continually in the back of my mind. Every time I faced my reflection, I could feel Emily's eyes boring into me, silently asking why I hadn't stepped in, why I hadn't fought for her when it mattered, and that's when I began to see the details I couldn't dismiss anymore. The posters in the halls started featuring her name, Emily's last day, missing person, and my heart dropped with a sickening realization. Flashes of a girl I barely knew but had played a part in shattering filled my dreams, her smile now twisted into a grimace, her dark eyes turning hollow. I told myself it was just guilt, that I could drown it out, but the whispers became louder as classmates whispered rumors about her fate. Some said she just switched schools for a fresh start, others that she had run away, but rumors morphed into something sinister in the bowels of small-town gossip and soon shifted to the idea that she had vanished into the wilderness, swallowed whole. Days turned into months as high school pulsed on, but the whisper of Emily remained. Class presentations blurred into feelings of dread, and whenever I caught a glimpse of a girl with dark hair, my heart would jump before realizing it wasn't her. Then, things took a darker turn. I read online articles referencing a girl with a similar description who had been found wandering in the woods, completely detached from reality, mumbling disjointed phrases about monsters and voices. My hands trembled as I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but I knew deep down that it wasn't. Unable to cope, I spent hours scouring social media, looking through incomplete posts that hinted at her torment. Her twisted journey poured out like a torrent, revealing photographs taken by brave souls who had stumbled upon her outlines in the woods, and her pale skin stretched thin around sharp bones told stories of exposure and madness. I started having nightmares where I'd be in those woods, her eyes wide with terror as she pointed into the darkness, and no matter how often I tried to shake her off, claiming I didn't know her or pushing her away, her defiance held strong as she kept walking deeper into the shadows. The last time I looked at my reflection, I was no longer certain I recognized the person staring back. I felt her presence there, in the corners of my mind, her words echoing constantly, "You did this." I couldn't escape it, I couldn't escape her. Months later, I got a text from an unknown number, just a photo of the woods at dusk, eerily peaceful yet filled with a foreboding vibe that seemed to throb through the screen. It was enough to send panic coursing through me, drowning out any rational thought as I looked outside, reluctant to find darkness closing in. I remember hearing the whispers of friends fading into the background, watching people laugh and smile while my heart raced in turmoil, and that night, those damn woods pulled me into them. I followed an inexplicable pull driving me deeper, each step echoing with the sounds of my heart, the shadows teasing my thoughts, knowing that at any moment Emily would appear, and she did. I felt her icy fingers grazing the back of my neck as I stood petrified, and then she whispered, quiet as the shadows, "You're next." I awoke in my bed, drenched in sweat, convinced it was a waking nightmare, yet a crippling dread filled me each day. School ended, graduation approached, but Emily's presence never left. Her haunting became my reality as I carried her shadow with me, the weight unbearable. Years later, I could only wonder if every girl I saw with dark hair was her lost soul begging for release or if I was just chasing phantoms of my own making. I made a girl quit school, and even if I could erase the past, I know the guilt would cling to me forever, a ghastly reminder that sometimes the woods don't take you, but they let you wander, trapped in a torment of your own design. It was supposed to be a carefree day hiking with friends, just a way to escape the mundane routine of life, but as I stumbled over an ancient route, I felt a jolt of pain shoot through my ankle that made me gasp, and although I sensed a deep twinge signaling something probably twisted or sprained, I didn't want to ruin the day for everyone, so I bit my lip and grinned, shrugging it off as just that, a harmless trip. I told my friends that I was fine, masking the agony roiling inside with a facade of bravery, and as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I focused on ignoring the discomfort while we continued our hike along the winding trails. Laughter echoed around me as we shared stories beneath the tall pines, the canopy shielding us from the impending dusk, but beneath my laughter was a growing anxiety, the nagging sensation that ignoring the injury might lead to something worse. When the day turned to twilight and we decided to turn back, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Soon, I'd be at home, ice on my ankle, wrapped in blankets and binge-watching my favorite series. The laughter quieted and I could see the path back winding in the dim light, so I took a deep breath and pushed through the fiery pain with every step, the adrenaline almost blinding me to the realization that my foot was slowly failing me, the ache buzzed like an electric current, pulsing through my limbs. Suddenly, the forest was alive with sounds, rustling in the bushes, something heavy moving just out of sight, and my heartbeat quickened, the thrill of the unknown mixing with my anxiety. I stumbled again and, in that moment of vulnerability, I heard something, a low growl resonating from the foliage, deep and guttural, a sound that sent prickles tingling at the back of my neck. My heart raced, blending panic with the thrill of adventure, but a sickening twist hit my gut. I wasn't alone. Crouching now and trying to peer through the leaves, I bit my lip hard enough to taste iron, suddenly understanding that the forest, once a sanctuary, had turned terrifying. The growl came again, closer, and as I pushed myself back up, the pain in my ankle intensified sharply, shooting through me like a lightning bolt. Panic flooded my system, and I rushed down the path, adrenaline and dread fueling my every move. My friends were ahead, their figures gleaming in the last light, but each step was sheer agony. My foot felt like it was shattering beneath me. I wanted to scream for them to wait, to help me, but I couldn't. The growl behind me urged me on, the fear dissipating rational thought, and instinct took over as I stumbled, falling to my knees, a searing pain coursing through my ankle. Just then, as my palms met the dirt, I heard a rustling that made my blood run cold. Whatever it was It was now almost upon me. Suddenly, I felt an urge to take one final look, to confront the terror that was lurking, so I twisted my body around, breath shallow and panicked, and there it was, a wolf, its eyes glimmering in the dark, inches away, muscles tensed, poised for whatever it was about to do. My heart hammered in my chest, and just as I thought the end was near, I realized, in its eyes flickered a glimmer of something else, something familiar. It was a tinge of fear, perhaps generated from my own panic. In that fleeting moment, I recalled the wisdom of my childhood, never show weakness to animals, so I steeled myself against the rising tide of terror. Perhaps due to my injured state or some primal instinct, I whispered, not words, but a low, calming sound, a lull of sorts, and astonishingly, the wolf paused. It tilted its head, as if trying to decode my essence, and in that split second, an otherworldly connection formed between us. Something inside me clicked. I realized that the very thing I had dismissed as a mere injury had, against all odds, saved me. I wasn't just any prey, I had shown my bone-deep flaws, my human fragility, and now the beast had retreated slightly. My friends finally reached me, calling out in confusion, and as they regrouped, the wolf simply turned, dissolving into the thicket as suddenly as it had appeared. The moment hung like an unshakable fog, wrapping around us as I sat there, trembling but unharmed, the pain in my ankle becoming a distant echo now that the threat had passed. Later, as we hobbled back to the car, I felt the weight of that encounter grafting itself onto my soul. I had faced primal fear and, somehow, I'd come through. My ankle did swell, and I ended up needing a brace for weeks to come, but I realized that the true injury had never been physical. It was the lie I spun to myself about being invincible and the desperate act of burying pain, an act that, in a twist of cruel irony, forced me to confront not just my limits, but the raw, visceral truth of vulnerability, the belief that embracing fear sometimes brings with it strange allies and reveals a fierce resilience I never knew I had. I've been running a company totally drunk for more than a year, and I can't believe I actually let it get this far. It all started in the wake of my divorce, where I found solace in whiskey neat, the burn crawling down my throat becoming a temporary balm for the aching void left in my chest. I used to be the proud owner of a small marketing firm, passionate about creativity and innovation, but one evening, after yet another heated argument with my now ex-wife, I stumbled into my home office with a bottle of my favorite bourbon and an idea that seemed brilliant at the time. What if I just made every decision under the influence? I laughed out loud at the absurdity, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and my glass emptied time and again, that idea became a challenge, a twisted game I dared myself to play. The first email I sent that night was fumbling and incoherent, but when I woke up the next morning with a hangover so fierce it felt like my skull was being crushed in vice grips, I discovered that my team had responded positively to my drunken rants about innovative out-of-the-box branding strategies. From that moment, I embraced the chaos, often arriving to work reeking of alcohol, the remnants of the night playing a cruel game of hide-and-seek with my sanity. Every Monday, I would schedule a drunk strategy meeting, which evolved into a twisted ritual where my employees would bring me shots and I'd mesh terrible ideas with dubious logic, yet somehow, we began winning clients. The thrill of hearing our revenue skyrocket drowned out any sober voice of reason, and I grew addicted to the validation of my reckless decisions, until things shifted in catastrophic ways. There was an audible buzz in the office as newly signed clients grew increasingly enthusiastic about my unique approach, and I reveled in the high from their praise while desperately needing another drink to patch over the gnawing uncertainty in my chest. Gradually, I became more and more isolated, fear-deepened shadows crept into my employees' eyes, their laughter no longer echoing with the joy it once did. I started seeing them through a foggy haze, like apparitions that only existed to mask my decaying grip on reality. As I stumbled through my daily life, I started having unsettling visions. I saw my ex-wife walking through the office, her face twisted in disappointment, whispering fierce truths about my decline, truths I didn't want to confront. At nights, the walls would close in, pulsating with the rhythm of my heartbeat, as the whispers became screams, clawing at the edges of my sanity. Then one particular night, when I was most volatile, I decided to throw a birthday party for myself in the office, thinking it would be the peak of my grand circus act, inviting all of my friends and everyone who ever thought I could do no wrong. The party spiraled out of control as I drank until the bottles were empty, the room hazy from cigarette smoke and cheap cologne, but that wasn't my biggest mistake. The real blunder came when a client walked in, towering over the chaos, an important investor who'd sworn they'd back our next big project, and in my inebriated stupor, I slurred out some obscene, unfiltered truths, Things about methods of collateral that had nothing to do with business strategies and everything to do with my own moral decay. Their face paled like the ghost of past decisions, and without another word, they left, their footsteps echoing like the funeral march for my carefully constructed walls. That was the night everything began to collapse. I barely made it through the rest of the party, retreating far too late into the bottom of a bottle, the look on my team's faces becoming a nightmare I couldn't shake as I drifted into unconsciousness. I awoke a week later in a hospital bed, my body trembling from withdrawal, detoxed and stripped of the liquid courage I once relied upon, the message on my phone illuminating messages from a dozen clients who had terminated our contracts, each word a dagger to my already shattered pride. I stumbled back to my office as though I were a ghost in my own life, walking through a mausoleum of bad decisions only to find it empty, crumbling around me like my self-worth. Chairs stood overturned, files scattered like fallen leaves, and there were no signs of life, no laughter ringing through the halls. Just a chilling silence that crawled under my skin. My office door creaked open, revealing the window where skylight streaming in barely illuminated the room, and it occurred to me that the whispers of regret were more than just echoes of a drunken stupor, they had become living shadows haunting the remnants of my poisoned empire. And just as I realized the gravity of what I'd become, I saw my ex-wife once more, standing in the doorway with a look of sorrow mixed with disbelief, telling me I had a choice, either grab the pieces and stop running from the truth or let it consume me whole. I hesitated, grappling with the weight of her words as I stumbled toward the shattered remains of my laptop, flickering to life and begging for my attention, the screen displaying an unopened email from a nameless entity with a single line, "It's time to clear your head and face the darkness." That's when I understood that I had really been running my company while drunk on shame, intoxicated by mistakes, and immersed in a fantasy where recklessness was synonymous with creativity. The truth speared through my mind, I wasn't just drunk. I had been playing a game against myself, and the stakes were higher than I could ever imagine. So, as I faced my ex-wife, resentment took a backseat to something foreign. I began to shake, not from the alcohol, but from the painful recognition of my own failures. It started to sink in, those shadows lurking in every corner weren't just there to haunt me, they were reminders that I could either stand up and reclaim my life or fall deeper into a pit that I had cowardly dug for myself. The clock was still ticking. And as I took a deep breath, I knew it was time to face my demons, a time when feeling sober would be more than just a state of mind, it would be a path toward an uncertain redemption. Stepping forward, I forged the resolve to confront the mess I had made, not just of my company, but of my life, and in that moment of clarity, I pictured the alcohol as a distant specter, one that must be dimmed and banished if I was ever going to find peace. I was done running. When I'm at work, sometimes I let people have things for free. And I never thought it would lead to something terrifying until the day Ellen walked in. She was just another customer in my small-town convenience store, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names and the daily special is written in fading marker on a chalkboard. Ellen always looked a little out of place, her clothes were too nice for our rundown neighborhood, her hair was perfectly done, and her smile felt rehearsed. At first, I thought she was just trying to lighten her workload by picking up snacks for the craft night she hosted at her house. But on this particular Thursday, something about her seemed different, as though she was searching for something deeper than just a snack. I had just finished restocking when she came up to the register with a pack of gum, her eyes flickering to the scant selection of drinks behind me. There was something compelling about her, something that made me want to reach out and connect, to break the mundane cycle of transactions that droned on day after day. Without thinking, I told her, "You can have that for free." Her smile widened, revealing cheerful dimples that brought warmth to the usual chill of the store. But instead of gratitude, I felt a shiver slip down my spine when she leaned closer and whispered, "You should be careful what you give away." Those words lingered like a bad omen, clinging to my thoughts even as she walked out the door, a lightweight breeze shifting the air behind her. The following week, I found myself drawn to her again as she entered the store, this time with a careful look on her face. I knew she was examining me as much as I was her, and maybe I was the only one who noticed how she hovered at the edge of the fluorescent lights, as if standing too close to them. I offered her a candy bar, thinking it might put the doubt to rest, but instead, her expression turned cold. She took it, all while meticulously counting how many candies I'd given away in the last month. The darkness wrapped around the air in the store like a fog, thick and heavy, and I started to notice more signs of it, the late-night customers leaving awkward silences in their wake, customers who glanced over their shoulders as if expecting a shadow to follow them. My co-workers thought I was losing it, talking about paranoia and stress. But each time Ellen came in, those whispers echoed louder. One evening, I had to stack supplies along the back of the store when I stumbled across an old flyer pinned to the wall for a missing person, a girl who had vanished without a trace. I felt a weird flutter in my stomach, a connection that maybe I was overlooking. The flyer faded and blurred, but the mundane words turned sinister. "If you have any information, please come forward." I found out she had last been seen at a craft night, the same one Ellen hosted. I didn't get a chance to ask her about it. When she came in next, I noticed the unsettling shadow beneath her eyes. I tried to confront her with the flyer, but she laughed, her voice lacking sincerity, and then, unnervingly, I felt an overwhelming urge to offer her more free things, as if my instincts were being warped like the circumstances surrounding her presence. I should have listened to myself. I heard an urgency in her laughter that echoed around me like an alarm. Instead, I fell deeper into the rabbit hole, offering her the chocolates, the drinks, and even snacks, feeling compelled, even enchanted, to keep giving her whatever she wanted. And that's when everything spiraled. The last time she came in, she stood at the counter, her eyes fixated on me in a way that made my skin crawl. "You know, those who take things for free shouldn't be surprised when they lose more than they bargained for," she muttered, her voice taking on a melodic yet ominous tone that resonated within me. I could hardly breathe, yet I felt unable to move as she leaned in closer, the fluorescent lights flickering uncertainly above us. There was something watching from the shadows, something both inviting and menacing. In a fevered rush, I tried to shake off the discomfort. I offered her the last of my stash, the store's best energy drinks. "You don't have to do that," she said, her smile twisting into something sinister yet sweet. Her fingers trailed over the drinks like an artist evaluating their work. "But you'll come to find out that nothing in this world is free, not even the kindness of strangers." I think I was still in that trance when I waved her out the door, but the dim light of the store flickered violently at that moment, and I heard a faint whisper echo in the darkness, "Keep giving them away." I dropped the energy drinks, they shattered on the floor like glass hearts, and Ellen simply walked away, leaving me surrounded by the crumbled remnants of her malevolence. Days passed, each more distorted than the last, until I finally decided to close the store for good. There was a gnawing realization that every free thing I had given her had drained a piece of my soul, twisting me into something dark. Yet, every night I still found myself waking with a jolt, staring at my pale hands, thinking about the next customer who would walk through those doors, someone else I could offer something to, freedom or fate. As Ellen taught me, the lines blurred in a cruel game. I haven't seen her since the day I closed the store, but sometimes, when the night goes quiet, I hear whispers in the shadows, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind, reminding me that when you give something up so easily, sometimes there's reflection in the darkness. And one day, perhaps I will pay that price. It was just another mundane Wednesday morning when I decided to throw caution to the wind and head to work without my bra, a small act of defiance against the everyday grind that seemed to be smothering me. The sun peeked through the blinds as I pulled on my blazer, the fabric a comforting cocoon around my shoulders, convinced that no one would notice my lack of undergarments beneath the structured layers. Walking into the office felt oddly liberating, a rush of adrenaline coursing through me as I blended in with the bustling crowd, but as the hours ticked on, an unsettling feeling crept in. It was a strange awareness that perhaps I was too free, too exposed. I glanced around the office, my colleagues engaged in their usual routines, tapping on keyboards, the air thick with mundane chatter. Yet there was something off, an atmosphere heavy with an unnameable tension lurking just beneath the surface. Shadows danced too long along the walls and laughter echoed a little too loudly, like a sinister chorus mocking my bravado. By lunchtime, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as if someone was watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. Was it just paranoia? I tried to shake it off, focusing on my sandwich while I overheard snippets of conversation, whisperings that grew clearer yet stifled as my name floated through the air, laced with hushed tones that only heightened my unease. I went to the restroom to splash cold water on my face, my reflection staring back with hollow eyes, and that's when I first noticed the flickering light above the mirror, pulsing like a heartbeat, almost rhythmic. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to poor maintenance, when suddenly a sharp knock startled me. It was Melanie from HR, her expression tight and unyielding as she leaned toward the door and whispered, "You need to get out of here." Confused and concerned, I stepped closer, my heart racing, demanding to know what was happening, but her eyes darted behind me, filled with something unrecognizable and terrified. I turned, but the restroom was empty, the overhead lights buzzed ominously. "You don't understand," she continued, her voice dropping to a hiss, "they're watching everyone." Panic washed over me, my stomach dropping as I processed her words. Was this some elaborate joke? Melanie was known for her dry humor, But this felt different, urgent. Before I could ask for clarity, she shoved a note into my hand and hurried away, leaving me to wrestle with the cryptic message scrawled in hurried, shaky handwriting. "The office isn't what it seems, there's a reason you feel watched." Clutching the note, I felt my earlier bravery dissolve into dread, every tick of the clock echoing louder, every footstep outside the restroom door a reminder that I was not alone, and for the first time since arriving, I wanted to flee. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out, intending to find a safe corner where I could think, but the moment I turned the corner, I stumbled into a coworker I had barely spoken to, Daniel, a shadow of a man with vacant eyes who stood in the middle of the corridor, his gaze locking onto mine with an unsettling intensity. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice shaky as if he was afraid to be overheard, further igniting the fire of fear raging within me. I took a step back, but his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with bone-crushing strength. "The Watchers don't like people who don't follow the rules," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder, beads of sweat pooling on his forehead. I pulled away, backing up, my heart racing as I searched for an escape route. Something was terribly wrong. The office, my supposed sanctuary, transformed into a labyrinth where every face seemed to harbor secrets, every hallway twisted under the weight of unspoken threats. I scanned for Melanie or anyone familiar, but the atmosphere grew thicker, as if I had plunged into murky water, drowning in paranoia. Finally, I spotted the fire exit, that stark red symbol illuminating my path like a beacon of hope, but as I rushed toward it, the lights flickered violently, plunging the building into a half-darkness that pulled screams of terror from the mouths of my co-workers, turning the hustle and bustle of work into a nightmarish echo chamber of panicked voices. I pushed through the door and stumbled down the stairs, but the further I descended, the deeper I felt the oppressive weight of whatever was lurking in the dark. The fire alarm blared now, an awful siren piercing through the chaos, twisting the anxiety into full-blown terror. My legs felt weak, as if they were trying to reject this reality that had spiraled so quickly out of control. Just as I reached the last landing, the thick, sulphurous scent of smoke enveloped me, mingling with a metallic tang that tasted of fear. I realized I had to get out, only to be met by a wall of charred, iridescent figures standing in the doorway outside, their eyes hollow voids, gazing forward with an unknowable intent. They moved in unison, their bodies an amalgamation of office attire and something more grotesque, something that wasn't human, as they whispered my name in a chorus that drummed against my skull like an impending reckoning. My instincts screamed at me to turn and run, but they closed in, and as I felt their fingers brush against my skin, the last remnants of my physical form dissipated like smoke into the ether, engulfed by the darkness that welcomed me into a world devoid of safety or sanity. The irony hit me as I realized it was my rebellion against the mundane that had led me here, my choice to remove my bra resulting in a far more profound nakedness beneath their insatiable gaze. I once thought I possessed autonomy, but I had traded my freedom for a front-row seat to an elaborate trap I couldn't escape. Now, as I exist in this haze of shadowy dread, I can hear the whispers rise up in the office above, echoing through the void, warning those who might tread where I once did, engulfed by the weight of a choice that seemed insignificant but bore a consequence far greater than I could have fathomed.